Mostly for me, it's, what does it mean? Like, where's that moment where when we read a thing or we consume the data, that it becomes meaningful to us? I mean, at that point, it's then got value. But that meaning is completely open to interpretation. And so these pieces, I could work with the same data set and produce, 10, 12 different looking things. But it's all the same data. It's just a matter of how you look at it. But the data is the same. So these are not like data I'm finding online or data I'm collecting out of my own journals or anything. This is somebody else's stuff. And this was all from the early 30s. So beyond some printed graph paper that can be found, it's people hand drawing with pencils pretty much on the back of printed agendas, because you can see that they're recycling paper. That's, like they printed too many meeting agendas from last week, and so they're out in the field just drawing them on the back, and they draw out these grids, spreadsheets. They're making their own spreadsheets just by hand. They're not using a ruler, and they're making all the notations, and you can tell by the handwriting that it's the same person that's going out and is responsible for collecting this stuff. And in one, I even found a leaf that was in there. It's been sitting in there for almost 90 years now, right? And I think to myself how they're having a similar journey that I'm having, that they're making a record of something, but it's also, it's more than that. It's their experience of collecting the data. It's his handwriting. I assume it's a guy, because it seems to me that mostly it was men that were all listed, and so I hate to assume, but it's you can tell. It's one person that's going out there every day because they've got this project, and they're standing out in the woods somewhere in a very specific spot with a light meter, and they're measuring light intensity in this quadrant, and then they're going to move over here, and they're going to do it here, and they're writing down the time. So, at 1:45 p.m. on XX date 1934, this guy was standing in this location with a light meter, checking it and writing it down. It's it documents that person's life and their relationship to the forest, to the wood, to their environment, to the light that's in the trees, as well as the data that's there, which I find, that I'm sure that other people would find that very interesting to, look at that data and reflection of going out and taking that data again today, and what can we learn? That's not my job.
Sure.
Like this piece right now, and it's the working title, because I kind of like to have working titles. This one is The Light Through the Trees. And I think been thinking a lot about light recently. And so coming, of course, probably because I found that data and thought it was intriguing to think about the trees in terms of the light, not actually the trees themselves. So maybe data, maybe trees, maybe the story of who we are and how we fit with things is not just the thing themselves, but the light that's cast onto it, our perception that allows that space to be filled and populated by all those many objects in the world. And so like for what's going on with this painting right now, you can see there's this origami pattern that's underneath it, and there's actually 4 plots in the data set. There's 4 plots on one piece of paper, and taken at 4 corners. So four data sets from each corner. So the 4 quadrants come together to make one plot. TS number 7, it said at the top. And then, so you've got this kind of structure underneath, but at this point I'm now starting to go over that and hide it with this white wash. So that's going to be this sort of diffusing thing that happens. The trick of the light. The light is showing us things, but the light is just as blinding as the dark. Yeah, so I'm going to be making it disappear and come back and disappear and come back, and every time I do that, it's going to degrade somehow. Something's going to drop away, something will come forward, and it's like the 10 data points within that one set from that one plot. Like that person went with the equipment and took 10 measurements. What if they'd taken 100? How would that be different? What story would it tell us? What more would we know? Or what more confusion would we have? It's like there's a limit to how much detail you can have before the whole thing just falls into chaos. But you have to have enough detail to where you've got some sort of structure in which to understand the thing. So where is that line? I'm not sure. So it's the same data set as this
well,
one.
How about that?
Same one. Yeah. And I did all the drawings for each one of these independently. I was making 4 different paintings. And then when I was moving that drawing around, and I was looking at the big plats, at the archive, those are beautiful. I mean, they're digitized online, but it is not the same as seeing those hand-drawn documents. They're backed paperboard with linen.
Well,
they're gorgeous things. I mean, it's totally worth getting those out.
Yeah.
And they've got these little rings on the side that line up with this big key, one map that shows you how all the different ones fit together, and then you can lay them out all on a table. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I did that with these, because these are data from one plot of land in 4 different corners. What would happen?
Done with the 4
And
sections.
then I'll be damned, they lined up.
Cool.
I didn't plan it. The data just did it. So it ends up that it's this part. And if you look at the data set, this length exists in each one because in each data set there was one value that was so much bigger than all the others. And I'm not sure why that is. But for each one of those little groups of 10 little data things, that was true for each one. So it ended up creating this kind of long thing instead of having the data kind of scattered all around into some sort of homogeneous presentation, which often it does, but usually asymmetrical, but kind of homogeneous. Yeah. This one, it ended up skewing it. Each one of them was that way. And then they fit together. I mean, they really fit together. I mean, look at that.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that. That's totally, those are 2 different data sets that fit together beautifully.
When we're looking at this, what is the data? And what's not?
It's the, you see these lines here that run through and they come to this section. So they're the angular lines that you're seeing, and they run to these main intersections. So, like in the corner, that is likely, usually, that would be one point. So there's 10 different points that exist on each one of these panels. This would be one of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, I see. There's a group of intersecting lines at each one. I didn't even notice those.
And then imagine that there's a circle here, right? So that this is an intersection. Imagine there's a circle, and that there's a circle around this one as well. So what the program does is help determine how big those circles can be in size relationship to each other. So bigger circles for a bigger data number. So for this one, for example, because the data this was such a much bigger number, maybe twice as big as the others, we get a really big arc that would have been necessary to accommodate the size in order to fold the paper to make it do the thing and be relational in terms of the data. So like this would have been a smaller circle and it would have butted up against this one. I can show you the design stuff for it. I mean, I do have all that stuff here on my iPad. I can show you that. But then I just reinterpret. I then interpret those folding patterns into 2-dimensional artwork rather than folding them into something. There's lots of ways to identify certain things within, and of course now this is a small data set, so it would be very easy for you to understand something that you're looking for as a researcher pretty quickly by just being able to look at, there's 10 items on your list. But if there was 10,000 in your data set, if you were able to interpret it visually through a piece of art or, ideally music, really, you can hear it. You can hear when there's a moment that's very much different than all the others. They stick out, and they stick out in a way that they don't in a spreadsheet. And it can be, I think, it's a much faster diagnostic tool to be able to get to this thing that you're looking for, rather than sorting or rearranging data or any number of searches you might do on your data. This is just a different way of seeing it. There's so much data there. There were 90 to 100 boxes of stuff, and they're the really big, long ones.
How many boxes do you think you went through?
I looked at 10 or 12. I looked at the ones that I was absolutely sure I wanted to see, and took a lot of photographs, which would probably be enough data for me to make work for the next 10 years. And then made note of which boxes that I looked at I would want to go back at. Like there was one box that had, the first half of it was seedling data, and then the next half was burn data. I'm like, that's a musical score right there. And this birth and regeneration that's going on, that sounds fantastic as a musical composition, and the data's just sitting right there, all tied up with little strings. And one bit of data was tied up with a yellow ribbon, which was so funny, you know, like tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, except it was pine tree data. It's a treasure trove of artistic fodder over there.
What's the most interesting thing you found in there? What looking at? Like, was there an image or anything that was?
It was a leaf I found.
Oh, that leaf. Yeah.
It was a little tiny leaf, not a very particularly pretty one. I mean, it got in there by accident, you could tell. It wasn't saved. It wasn't stored in a little plastic sleeve or put into an envelope with somebody's name and initials on it or dated or anything. It was just literally got stuck in there. In between, you know, somebody walking out in the woods with a clipboard. And I wanted it really badly. And it was funny because when I went in, you know, every time I'd leave, they'd make me open up my iPad case, you know, and I'm like, see, nothing in there. Like, I'm not stealing anything. I'm like, why would I want to steal anything in here? I mean, I wouldn't want to steal. Like, I wanted to steal that leaf so bad because it was a tangible thing from that time that somebody went out and cared about. You know, I mean, I know that these are our jobs and they're our professions, our careers, and we can talk about them in that way. But, you know, if it was all about just putting food on the table, you could literally do anything. But we are looking to be satisfied. We're looking to be joyful in our work. We're looking to satisfy some need that we have that others don't, you know, like I do this work and other people like languages, or they go into healthcare or something. I'm not driven in those ways. And seeing that leaf in there just made me realize I wasn't just looking at data. I was looking at people that cared enough about this to get up every day, grab their clipboard, and take a light meter out into the woods and write this stuff down because it mattered to them. And the idea that we're almost 90 years later, that somebody, thankfully, didn't throw that stuff out.